And now it's time for a preview of an upcoming game by
Today
Tom
we're going to be
Vasel.
taking a preview look at a new game from GMT called Thunder Alley. Now, Thunder Alley is basically a NASCAR simulation game. Although calling it a simulation is probably more than it is. It's a condensed, fun racing game. I'm going to show you how it plays, and then I'll talk about it a little bit more. Here we go. Now, remember that all the components that you are seeing here are prototype components. This is a Kickstarter campaign, so the final results will be much better than this. This is just here so you can see how the game works. There's a racetrack in the game, and NASCAR racetracks are very similar, but in this one, there are multiple tracks that can be played with this game, and the length and how the curves work are what's different in between them. But each person's going to pick a color, and then they're going to get a certain number of cars of that color, depending on the number of players in the game. The fewer players, the more cars you will control. So you can see it's possible to have up to 6 cars per player. And this is where you will keep the information about each of the cars as you play them. The game will start and players will take turns placing the cars on the starting spots on the track. So here's some examples of some cars on the track, and each of these cars has a white side and a dark side, and the reason for that is because what you'll do is you're going to move the cars, and on your turn you'll move one of your cars, and then when you're done moving it, you'll turn it over to this side, and you'll keep doing it till all the cars are on the gray side. Once all the cars are on the gray side, then that turn is over. Now, what you're doing with these cars is you're trying to race around the track. The race here is only 2 laps, but that actually simulates the whole thing. Each turn is like multiple laps. Because in a NASCAR race, the cars aren't constantly, there's not a huge amount of changes for each lap. It's these minor changes over the course of the game. The game has a bunch of cards that players will have. Each player will have one more card than the number of cars that they have in the race. So if you're racing with 4 cars, you would have 5 cards. So you use all the cards except 1. Each turn, you will use one of your cards, and it will tell you what kind of movement. So for example, here we see solo movement. It will tell you how many spaces you move, and it will tell you what kind of damage that does to your car. And that's the color and the shape here at the top. And so I would take a damage token of that type and place it on my sheet for the car that I'm moving with that. There's different kinds of damage. There is permanent damage, which this one is the engine damage, but there are also temporary damage. Temporary damage can be gotten rid of at a pit stop. The more damage that you have, the slower your car will be, and you really don't want to go, if you have 6 damage, your car is out of the race. However, 3 damage will make you start slowing down the car, but before you have 3 damage, you're fine. So you'll probably want to stop at the pit stop at some point to get rid of the temporary damage. If you notice at the bottom of the card deck here, there's also a row of symbols. That's just used. Sometimes we need a random order for cars, and so there's one of these on every card. So when you need some kind of randomosity in the game, that's what you would choose. There are 4 different types of movement in the game. There's solo movement, pursuit movement, lead movement, and draft movement. Some cards, like this teamwork card, also let you do something else. For example, this lets you move another car. And so there are special cards that give you a little bit different kind of movement. But let's take a look at these 4 kinds of movements. Solo movement, you just simply move the car the amount of spaces it shows. Now you're able to move sideways, although you can't move into this. That's the pit lane. You can move forward. You can never move backwards, but you can move that many spaces. So you can move around other cars. You can even push cars to the side or push the ones in front of you, but that will cost more movement points, but it's possible. Solo movement moves just your car. Draft movement, let's say I play draft movement on this yellow car here. Before I do the draft movement, you can move sideways, or laterally any way you want, but then when you start moving forward, all the cars in front of you and behind you will also move. So let's say that this yellow car here had a draft movement of 5, then he would move forward 5, and so would every other car in that column. So you can see that you can move your cars even when it's not their turn to move. Because you see I flipped him, the 7 there, because it was I was the one who played the card in him, but he managed to move the other yellow card. And these 2 blue cars, this orange car and red car, also got to come along for the ride. If you're traveling in your line of cars that are moving with you, bump into cars in front of you, those cars also join the draft. Pursuit movement's very similar, but only the cars in front of you would move. So that's pretty simple. And then lead movement, only the cars behind you follow you. And when you do lead movement, let's say this orange car here did lead movement of 5, he could turn too, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and the cars behind him would follow him as he twists and turns on the track. So you can see that lead movement and pursuit movement are very similar to draft movement. And with those three being in the game, most of the time cars will be moving not just in their turn, but in everyone else's turn. After all the cars have turned and have moved, and you flip them to the other color, then the turn is over, and you're going to give a token to the lap leader, because at the end of the game, each car that was a lap leader at least once is going to get a victory point. Also, if you ever pass a car, we will put lapped on that car, and if that car is not finished by the end of that round, does not come out of being lapped, because it's very easy in this game to be lapped, especially if you fall behind, then that car falls out and must take the trophy for whatever place is currently last. You can see here's 21st place, and that's worth 23 points at the end of the game. At the end of each round, there is then a special card that is drawn. These cards here are event cards, and they will often have to do with the different types of damage you take. The person with the most suspension, the person with the most tire tokens blows a tire. Sometimes it will rain. The sky could be overcast. There's all different things that could happen because of these event cards. One of these is taken each turn, and then players decide whether they'll go into the pit or not. They can go into the pit and basically just slide over, and then they go back some spaces to show that the other cars are passing them. And when they come out of they will heal their temporary damage, and when they come out of the pit, they'll use any card to get out of that pit, but they have to use the small gray number to get out. And that's basically it. Once everyone has finished the race, they get points according to their place. You add those any points you got from being lap leader, and whoever has the most points for all their cars is the winner. There's a lot of good things to say about this game. What is really interesting is how you aren't invested in one car, but you have several cars. So if one of your cars isn't doing well, that's not a problem as long as your other ones are doing fine. You can you're switching your attention back and forth, and you're never really out of the race. I mean, well, I guess if you're lapped, you are. But if you can manage to hook your tail or get onto the line of someone else who's doing well, you can have them draft for you. Ideally, you'd love to have all your cars in a line and play several draft cards and move them all together. But you're going to have solo cards that you draw. You're going to have different cards, and so you have to figure out how best to use your cards to get your cars into the proper position. When do you go to the pits? Because you probably will have to at some point. You can soldier on without going to the pits, possibly, but it's going to be tough. You can get a pretty good chunk around the track on one turn. And so it's very interesting. There's cars moving all over the place, and it's a very fun method of moving. The draft method of moving is one that people will enjoy because you are never bored when it's not your turn. You're watching what someone else does because they might just be moving your car for you. They likely will. And so you can bring the cars along behind you too, but you have to figure out when is that point where I need to leave them in the dust and pull out to my own so that I can win this race. So a really good race. I thought it did a very good job of simulating a 500 lap race in only 2 laps. So if you're interested in this, we're about to show you the link for the Kickstarter campaign from GMT Games on Kickstarter right now. Check it out.
Thanks for watching our review today. For more information about board games, as well as the #1 board game audio podcast, check out Dicetower.com for reviews, interviews, and more. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.